calling on there a clear message to fossil fuel companies not to double down on this obsolete model. And now, as you can see from these live pictures coming to us, King Charles is making his way to the stage. He's expected to say that warning signs of climate change are being ignored. He's asking for this to be a game-changing conference. Let's take a listen to what he has to say.
Your Highness, Secretary General, Your Majesties, Your Royal Highnesses, Presidents, Prime Ministers, Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan for his warm invitation to speak to you at the opening of Cop28. 8 years ago, I was most touched to be asked to speak at the opening of Cop21 in Paris, which of course culminated in the Paris Agreement, a landmark moment of hope and optimism when nations put differences to one side for the common good. I pray with all my heart that COP28 will be another critical turning point towards genuine transformational action at a time when already, as scientists have been warning for so long, we are seeing alarming tipping points being reached. I've spent a large proportion of my life trying to warn of the existential threats facing us over global warming, over climate change and biodiversity loss. But I was not alone. For instance, Sheikh Mohammed's dear father, Sheikh Zayed, was advocating for clean energy at a time even before the United Arab Emirates as such came into being. All these decades later, and despite all the attention, there is 30% more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere now than there was back then, and almost 40% more methane. Some important progress has been made, but it worries me greatly that we remain so dreadfully far off track, as the Global Stocktake report demonstrates so graphically. The dangers are no longer distant risks. I have seen across the Commonwealth and beyond countless communities which are unable to withstand repeated shocks, whose lives and livelihoods are laid waste by climate change. Surely, real action is required to stem the growing toll of its most vulnerable victims. Repeated cyclones batter vulnerable island nations like Vanuatu and Dominica. India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan have been experiencing unprecedented floods, and East Africa is suffering a decades-long drought. This past summer, in common with Spain, Greece, the United States, and many other countries, Canada experienced its most severe wildfire season on record, with 18.5 million hectares of land burned, causing terrible loss of life and property, and of course, releasing enormous amounts of greenhouse gases that contribute to dangerous feedback loops to which climate scientists have been alerting us for decades. As I've tried to say on many occasions, unless we rapidly repair and restore nature's unique economy based on harmony and balance, which is our ultimate sustainer, our own economy and survivability will be imperiled. Records are now being broken so often that we are perhaps becoming immune to what they are really telling us. When we see the news that this last Northern Hemisphere summer, for instance, was the warmest global average temperature on record, we need to pause to process what this actually means. We are taking the natural world outside balanced norms and limits and into dangerous, uncharted territory. We are carrying out a vast, frightening experiment of changing every ecological condition all at once, at a pace that far outstrips nature's ability to cope. As we work towards a zero-carbon future, we must work equally towards being nature positive. With what we are witnessing, our choice now is a starker and darker one. How dangerous are we actually prepared to make our world? Dealing with this is a job for us all. Change will come by working together and making it easier to embrace decisions that will sustain our world, rather than carry on as though there are no limits or as though our actions have no consequences. As you gather, ladies and gentlemen, for these critical negotiations, the hope of the world rests on the decisions you must take. I can only encourage you to consider some practical questions which might inform the task ahead of you. Firstly, how can our multilateral organizations, which were established at a different time for different challenges, be strengthened for the crisis we face? How can we bring together our public, private, philanthropic, and NGO sectors ever more effectively so that they all play their part in delivering climate action, each complementing the unique strengths of the others? Public finance alone will never be sufficient, but with the private sector firmly at the table and a better, fairer international financial system, combined with the innovative use of risk reduction tools like first loss risk guarantees, we could mobilize the trillions of dollars we need, in the order of $4.5 to $5 trillion a year, to drive the transformation we need. Secondly, how can we ensure that finance flows to those developments most essential to a sustainable future and away from practices that make our world more dangerous across every industry in every part of the world? I have, for instance, been heartened by some of the steps taken by parts of the insurance sector, which plays such a vital role in incentivizing more sustainable approaches and providing an invaluable source of investment to reduce the risks we face. Thirdly, how can we accelerate innovation and the deployment of renewable energy, of clean technology and other green alternatives to move decisively towards investment in this vital transition across all industries? For instance, how can we increase investments in regenerative agriculture, which can be a nature-positive carbon sink? What incentives are necessary? And how can those which have a perverse impact be eliminated with all due speed? Fourthly, how can we bring together different solutions and initiatives to ensure coherent, long-term approaches across sectors, countries, and industries? For virtually every artificial source of greenhouse gas emissions, there are alternatives or mitigations which can be put in place. That is why it is encouraging to see industry transition plans being developed both nationally and globally, which will help each sector of our global economy onto practical pathways to a zero-carbon, nature-positive future. And, ladies and gentlemen, fifthly, how can we forge an ambitious new vision for the next 100 years? How can we draw on the extraordinary ingenuity of our societies, the ideas, knowledge, and energy of our young people, our artists, our engineers, our communicators, and importantly, our indigenous peoples, to imagine a sustainable future for people everywhere, a future that is in harmony with nature, not set against her. Ladies and gentlemen, in your hands is an unmissable opportunity to keep our common hope alive. I can only urge you to meet it with ambition, imagination, and a true sense of the emergency we face, and together with a commitment to the practical action upon which our shared future depends. After all, ladies and gentlemen, in 2050, our grandchildren won't be asking what we said. They will be living with the consequences of what we did or didn't do. So if we act together to safeguard our precious planet, the welfare of all our people will surely follow. And we need to remember, too, that the indigenous worldview teaches us that we are all connected, not only as human beings, but with all living things and all that sustains life. As part of this grand and sacred system, harmony with nature must be maintained. The earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth.
And of course, King Charles there giving his opening address, speaking on a subject that many will know is very close to his heart. Of course, he spent much of his life focusing on climate change with this real call to arms there, I think you heard, using some very strong language, calling Cop28 this landmark moment of hope and optimism, saying that he believes this meeting today could be a critical turning point to genuine transformation there. And saying that really it worries him greatly that we remain so, in his words, dreadfully far off track on climate. And him also giving the talking about the wildfires in Canada, saying that we're seeing this alarming climate tipping point being reached, and dealing with climate change, him saying there is a job for us all. Well, let's go live now to Justin Rolat, who is in Dubai for us. And Justin, just listening to that speech from King Charles, how much of an impact do you think his presence and those quite strong words will have on world leaders who were sat listening to him?
You know, that's very hard to assess, isn't it? But it certainly was a rousing speech. And that's why, of course, the UAE invited him here. It's because, as you say, of his long history of environmentalism. There was a great line right at the beginning. He said, I've spent a large portion of my life trying to warn of the existential threats facing us over global warming, climate change and biodiversity loss. And it's that kind of his credentials, if you like, as an environmentalist, plus, of course, the fact that he's the king, that caused the UAE to invite him here. And they obviously, his role, as you suggest, is to kind of rally ambition and to do exactly what you heard him saying there. You know, hold people's feet to the fire, get them to make some serious commitments about cutting carbon, about funding the developing world to switch to clean energy and adapt to the climate change we know is coming, and double down on the effort to roll out renewables around the world. So really, this is a call to action at the beginning. Remember, we're just at the beginning of this conference. The world leaders now go into a conclave, and they'll be trying to, you know, rally them into signing up to, you know, ambitious action across all these fronts. So, yeah, this is a real concerted effort, obviously both by the UAE but also by the King, to try and make sure that they get a positive outcome. They've described, I don't know if you remember, the Paris Climate Summit back in 2015. That was Cop21. That was actually the first time that all the countries in the world agreed that they all needed to help tackle climate change. Prior to that, it was only the developed world that had the responsibility under the COP process to do so. Well, they're saying, the UAE, Cop28 will be as transformative as Cop21, as the Paris Climate Summit. Now, that is quite an ambition to hold, and it'll be really interesting to see over the next 2 weeks whether they can deliver on that bold pledge that they've made. Let's see. It's going to be fascinating.
It absolutely is, Justin. But, you know, they're talking about hope and optimism as we just begin these 2 weeks of this conference. But there has been some wins here for poorer countries. Just talk us through that announcement that we've had, cash for poorer countries, which we know they have been asking for years.
For decades, yeah. And very striking to have, I mean, look, this is for the COP kind of nerds, if you like, very striking to have a decision like that right at the beginning of the conference. Normally it's at the end of the conference they gavel through, that's the little hammer that the president has, they gavel through the decisions right at the end. But I think in a kind of, frankly, kind of masterstroke of PR, the UAE decided to gavel through, Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, the president gavelled through the opening of this much contested, as you say, loss and damage fund designed to be a pool of money to help developing countries cope with the effects of climate change right now. I'm talking about kind of, you know, hurricanes, storms, droughts that are affecting the developing world, which of course has almost no responsibility for the climate change that we're experiencing now. That's the caused by the rich world, which got rich burning fossil fuels. So gavelled that through, opened the fund, and then with all the world leaders there, he said, right, guys, now open your wallets and start paying in, and raised $400 million. Look, $400 million in the scheme of the challenge of tackling climate change is not a huge amount of money, but listen, it's a lot better than nothing. And what it means is we've got a real signal of progress right at the beginning, something for people like me to report to people like you to say, look, there is already progress. And hopefully that will create momentum for increasing ambition here, as you heard King Charles urging the world leaders to act on.
We really did. Justin Rowlatt, our climate editor in Dubai for us, and I'm sure we'll be speaking to Justin many times over the next 2 weeks as that conference continues.